I swear, if this piece of junk stalls on me one more time, I'm walking the rest of the way, Jonah Clarke muttered, slapping the dashboard of his rust-flecked '98 pickup as he pulled into the airport arrivals lane. His 6-year-old daughter, Sadie, giggled from the back seat, her purple backpack nearly swallowing her tiny frame. "It's not junk, Daddy," she said, hugging her stuffed dolphin. "It's just tired." Jonah ran a hand through his messy dark hair and chuckled. "Yeah, well, I'm tired too, kiddo." He was doing a favor for his buddy, who worked at baggage claim some woman's rideshare canceled last minute, and she was stranded. Jonah had a flexible schedule since he worked nights at the mechanic shop and picked up part-time shifts delivering groceries. He just dropped Sadie off at school when he got the call, and pick her up on the way back. He didn't expect to see the woman standing there in 4-inch heels, dragging a sleek Louis Vuitton suitcase behind her, sunglasses perched perfectly on her face like she'd stepped off a movie set. "Excuse me," she asked, peeking inside his rolled-down window, uncertain. "Are you Jonah?" "Yeah," he said slowly, taking in her polished look. "You Natalie?" She blinked at him, surprised. "Natalia. Natalia Carrington." Sadie leaned forward.
"Hi.
"I'm Sadie. You're really pretty." Natalia's face relaxed into a warm smile.
Hi, Sadie."
"Thank you, sweetheart." Jonah hopped out, grabbed her luggage, and popped it into the bed of the truck. "I'll warn you," he said, opening the passenger door. "This isn't exactly luxury." She gave him a look that was half amused, half intrigued. "That's okay. I've had enough luxury for a lifetime." Jonah lifted an eyebrow but didn't press it. They headed onto the highway, Sadie humming behind them and Natalia quiet beside him. It was a 30-minute ride to her Airbnb, and Jonah figured it'd be a silent one, but she surprised him.
"So,
Is Sadie your daughter?"
yup.
"Full-time job and full-time boss," he joked, glancing at the rearview mirror where Sadie was now drawing on her tablet. "Where's her mom?" He hesitated. "She passed when Sadie was a baby." "I'm sorry," Natalia said gently. "That must have been hard." "It was," he said simply. "But we make it work." Natalia nodded, then looked out the window. "I'm here for a break. Needed to get away from everything."
Ella?
"New York," she said. "But close." He glanced at her again. "You don't really look like someone who's running from anything." She laughed, and it was light and real. Looks can be deceiving. They got to the Airbnb, a small cottage on a quiet street in town. Jonah helped her with her bags up the porch steps. "Thank you again," she said, her hand brushing his as he passed her the suitcase. "And thank you, Sadie." Sadie waved. "Bye, Natalia." Natalia hesitated. "Would you maybe want to grab coffee sometime? I mean, as a thank you? You and Sadie." Jonah blinked.
Sure.
Yeah. That'd be nice." She smiled again, and something about it made his chest feel warm in a way it hadn't in a long time. 2 days later, they met at a little cafe near the lake. Sadie was thrilled with her giant cookie, and Jonah tried to focus on his black coffee instead of how good Natalia looked in jeans and a simple white tee. "I actually grew up not too far from here," she said, stirring her tea. "I haven't been back in years." "Funny," Jonah said. "You don't seem like the small-town type."
She grinned.
"Used to be.
Until my life got
complicated." "Complicated how?" Natalia looked at him, almost like she was testing him. "I run a small company." Jonah raised a brow. "What kind of company?" "Tech startup," she said quickly, then changed the subject. "Do you always do airport rescues?" He laughed. "Only for friends. And only when I don't have Sadie in school." Natalia looked over at Sadie, who was making her cookie talk to her juice. "She's amazing. You're doing a great job." Jonah shook his head. "I'm just trying to keep up. I don't have much, but she's got love and peanut butter sandwiches. That's something, right?" "It's everything," Natalia said softly. After the cafe, she invited them to walk by the lake. Sadie ran ahead, chasing ducks, and Natalia fell into step beside Jonah. "I'm glad I met you," she said. He glanced at her. "You say that like we're not gonna see each other again." "No, she hesitated. "I don't meet a lot of people who don't want something from me." He frowned. "What would I want from you?" Natalia smiled. "Exactly." Over the next week, they saw each other 3 more times. Once at the farmer's market, once when Jonah helped her change a flat tire, and once when Sadie begged to go back to the lake with Miss Natalia. Jonah had started to feel something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Hope. And it scared the hell out of him. Then came the night Natalia invited them for dinner at her Airbnb.
He almost didn't go.
His flannel was worn, his boots scuffed, and he didn't own anything that looked remotely nice. But Sadie insisted, and he couldn't say no to her excited little face. When they arrived, Natalia had cooked actual pasta, garlic bread,
wine.
The table was set with candles, and soft music played in the background. "This is fancy," Jonah said, looking around. Natalia laughed. "It's just dinner." But it wasn't just dinner. They talked. They laughed. Sadie fell asleep on the couch halfway through dessert, and Natalia tucked a blanket around her. Jonah stood across the room, watching her, something heavy and real settling in his chest. "She likes you," he murmured. Natalia turned to look at him. "I like her. And I like you." He froze. "Natalia, I know," she said quickly. "This is fast. And complicated. But it doesn't feel wrong." He stepped forward, slowly. "It doesn't." They stood in silence for a moment before he reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. She leaned into his touch. "I don't have much to offer," he said quietly. "Not really. You've already given me more than most people ever have," she whispered. And then she kissed him. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't wild. It was soft, steady, and full of something that made Jonah's knees weak. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I don't want to leave," she whispered. "Then don't." He didn't know then that Natalia Carrington was a millionaire. He didn't know she owned a company that had just sold for over $80 million. He didn't know she'd walked away from boardrooms and penthouses and private jets to come here and remember what life without pressure felt like. He just knew he was falling for her, and she was falling right back. The next morning brought the kind of silence Jonah wasn't used to. Sadie had stayed the night at his cousin's place for a sleepover with her kids. They'd planned it all week, and the house felt too still without her. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the mug of coffee he hadn't touched, his mind replaying the way Natalia's lips had tasted like red wine and something warmer. Something real. He hadn't meant for anything to happen last night. It was supposed to be dinner. Nothing more. But when she kissed him, something inside him cracked open like it had been waiting for her all along. He hadn't kissed anyone in years. Hadn't wanted to. Now, he couldn't stop thinking about her. The knock came just after 9. He opened the door, still in his threadbare shirt, and there she was, Natalia, holding a paper bag in one hand and wearing a look that made his chest feel tight. "I brought breakfast," she said. "Figured you might not have had any." He stepped aside without a word, watching her walk in like she'd always belonged there. She set the bag on the table, pulled out 2 breakfast sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, and slid one toward him. "You always show up with food?" he asked, finally sitting down. "Only when I'm nervous," she said, unwrapping hers. "I didn't want last night to be a fluke. I didn't want you to think I was playing games." "I didn't think that," he said, his voice low. She looked at him across the table. "You didn't kiss me back like someone who's just being polite." "I'm not polite," he said, a little more rough than he meant. "Especially not about things that matter." Her expression softened. "So it matters." "Yeah," he said, eyes locked on hers. "It does." They ate mostly in silence after that, but it wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, like the space between them had already shifted into something known. When she stood to leave, he walked her to the door. She hesitated just before stepping out. I have to go into the city tomorrow, she said. Just for a day. A meeting I can't get out of. He nodded. You want me to drive you? She seemed surprised. You do that? I want to. Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. I'll text you the address. He nodded once. Be ready at 7. After she left, he stood in his doorway for a long moment, the cool morning breeze brushing past him. Something was shifting in his world, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't want to stop it. The next morning, the drive into the city was quiet until they hit the bridge, and the skyline started to unfold in front of them. Natalia had changed into something sleeker than he'd seen her wear before, a navy pencil skirt, cream blouse, and a coat that probably cost more than his monthly rent. She hadn't said much since they left the town limits, and Jonah knew better than to press. But as they passed the welcome sign, she spoke. You're not going to like what I'm about to tell you. He glanced sideways at her, one hand on the wheel. Try me. I didn't just grow up near your town. My family used to own half of it. He frowned. Used to? My father sold everything when I left for college. Said the town was too small for a Carrington future. Jonah blinked. Carrington. As in, yes, she said. That Carrington. He let out a slow breath. So, when you said you run a company. I own it, she corrected. And I sold it last month. For a lot. How much is a lot? She hesitated. North of 80 million. The truck was silent, but for the hum of the engine. And you didn't think to tell me that before? He asked. I didn't want it to change how you looked at me, she said quickly. I wanted you to see me, not the number in my bank account. You didn't lie. But you didn't exactly tell the truth either. I didn't know how, she admitted. You're not like anyone I've ever met. You don't care about status. You don't ask what people can do for you. Jonah tightened his grip on the wheel. Maybe I'm just not used to people who hide that kind of thing. I didn't hide because I don't trust you, she said. I hid it because I do. They reached the city just before 8. The street her building sat on was lined with glass towers and black sedans. Jonah pulled up to the curb, feeling out of place in his old truck amid the Bentleys and town cars. She unbuckled her seatbelt, but didn't move. I know this is a lot, she said. But I meant everything I said. Last night. This morning. I wasn't faking it. He didn't say anything. I'll be done by 5, she continued. If you want to pick me up. He stared straight ahead. I'll be here. That evening, she was already waiting outside when he pulled up. She stepped into the truck like it was a limousine, didn't flinch when the door creaked or the engine sputtered. She didn't say anything until they were halfway home. My ex called today. Jonah didn't respond. He thinks I'm making a mistake walking away from the company. From New York. Jonah glanced at her. What do you think? I think I finally feel like myself again, she said. And I don't want to go back to who I was before. Back at her Airbnb, she invited him in without asking. Sadie was already asleep at his cousin's again. Jonah had picked up an extra shift and dropped her off before heading to the city. He followed Natalia into the kitchen, where she poured 2 glasses of wine without asking. I've been thinking, she began, handing him a glass. I don't want to leave when the rental ends. He leaned against the counter. You're staying? I bought a place. She took a sip of wine. Old farmhouse just outside town. Needs work, but it's quiet. Real. He raised an eyebrow. You don't strike me as the fixer-upper type. I'm not, she said. But maybe I could be. With the right people around. She set her glass down and looked at him. I want you in my life, Jonah. And Sadie. If you'll let me. He set his glass aside, stepped in close. You're not scared? I'm terrified, she said. But I've been scared before. This time it's worth it. He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. Then we figured out, he said. She nodded. Together. He didn't kiss her this time. Not yet. Instead, he pulled her into his arms and just held her. Her heart beat steady against his chest, and something inside him settled. He didn't know what came next, but for the first time in years, he was ready to find out. Jonah didn't know what compelled him to say yes when Natalia asked if he and Sadie would come with her to the fall harvest dinner at the Riverside Vineyards that Saturday, but he didn't regret it. Not even when he pulled his truck between two gleaming black Escalades and saw a valet glance at it like it might leak on the gravel. Natalia met them at the entrance, under a canopy of golden string lights hung between trees. She wore a navy wrap coat and brown leather boots with a small heel, her hair held back by a simple bronze clip. She looked like she belonged here among the polished, the poised, the endlessly rich. Jonah adjusted Sadie's coat and tightened her scarf. "You sure this is okay?" Natalia stepped forward and kissed his cheek. "You're exactly who I want here. Both of you." He didn't say anything, but Sadie piped up. "Do they have pie?" Natalia laughed and took her hand. "They have 5 kinds." Inside the Vineyards event hall, the space glowed with warm amber lighting and the scent of roasted apples and wood smoke. Long wooden tables were set with pressed linen and flickering candles. There were strings playing softly in the background, and servers in white shirts wove through the guests offering drinks on silver trays. "I hope you're not expecting me to use the right fork," Jonah said dryly as they were seated. "I'm not expecting anything," Natalia said, sliding into the seat beside him. "Just that you try the butternut squash tart." He glanced around. "So, these people know you?"
Some of them, she said.
"I used to come to events like this all the time, but it feels different now." "How so?" "I used to feel like I needed to prove I belonged in the room." She turned to him. "Now I don't care." He watched her for a moment. "That sounds like freedom." "It is. And it's terrifying." Midway through dinner, a tall man in a gray suit approached their table with a drink in hand and a practiced smile. "Natalia," he said smoothly. "Heard you were in town. Wasn't sure I believed it." Her posture stiffened slightly. "Ethan." Jonah didn't like the way the guy looked at her, like she was a negotiation he was about to win. "It's been a while," Ethan continued. "Last I heard, you were sunning yourself in Monaco." She gave a tight smile. "I was working." Ethan's eyes flicked to Jonah, then to Sadie, who was busy coloring on the back of a menu. "And this is—" "My daughter, Sadie," Jonah said. Ethan looked mildly amused. "And you are—" "A friend," Jonah said, holding his gaze. Natalia leaned forward. "Ethan, we're having dinner." "It was good to see you." Ethan smirked. Jonah hated how easy it looked on him and gave a small bow. "Of course. Enjoy the squash tart. I hear it's magnificent." When he was gone, Jonah turned to her. "Not exactly. My father tried to arrange something once. Ethan didn't care who I was, just what I came with." Jonah nodded slowly. He looked like he wanted to put me in a different seat. "That's because men like him hate anything they can't measure." After dinner, there was dancing in the side hall, and Natalia gently nudged Jonah toward the floor. "I haven't danced in years," he said, standing stiffly by the edge. "I'll lead," she teased. But when she took his hand, Jonah surprised himself by following. They moved slowly, swaying beneath a chandelier of hanging glass leaves. Her head rested near his shoulder, and he tightened his hold on her waist. "I feel like I'm in a dream," she murmured. "Don't wake up yet," he said. Later that night, back at her new farmhouse, Natalia stood barefoot in the kitchen, pouring cocoa into mugs while Sadie dozed in the armchair under a plaid blanket. Jonah leaned against the counter, watching her. "I should tell you something," Natalia said, sliding him a mug. "I'm not staying here just for peace and quiet." He waited. "I want to build something real. Not a company this time. A life." "You think that's here?" "I think it could be." She looked at him, her voice low. "With you." He didn't answer right away. Instead, He walked over to the window and looked out over the darkened fields, the moonlight casting silver over the hills. Then he turned. I don't have a savings account, he said. I don't have a plan beyond getting Sadie through school and fixing up cars until my hands give out. I know. And you're not just rich. You're the kind of rich that changes people. I walked away from that world, Jonah. But it's still yours. She stepped toward him. I want something that isn't bought or scheduled or polished until it shines fake. I want mornings with burnt toast and running late. I want scraped knees and bedtime stories. I want the kind of life that doesn't need a PR firm to explain it. He stared at her. You want a mess. I want a home. He reached for her hand. Then let's build one. They stood there, cocoa cooling between them, while the wind rustled the trees outside. Over the next 2 weeks, something shifted. Slowly at first, like waking up to a new season. Jonah started picking up Sadie from school and driving straight to the farmhouse, where Natalia would be waiting with battered recipe cards and paint swatches for the kitchen walls. They'd started a vegetable patch in the backyard. Natalia had no idea how to plant anything, but she wore gardening gloves with rhinestones and insisted that watering the soil was therapeutic. One afternoon, as Jonah and Sadie sat on the porch steps watching a squirrel attempt to raid the bird feeder, Natalia emerged holding 2 envelopes. What's that?
Jonah asked.
Something I've been working on. She handed him the first envelope. Inside was a deed with his name on it. He looked up, confused. I bought the lot next to mine, she said. I want to build a garage there. A real one. With lifts and tools, and a sign out front.
He blinked.
For what? For you. To run. However you want. I can't take that. You're not taking anything. I'm investing in you. He stared at the paper again, words catching in his throat. And the second envelope? She handed it to Sadie, who tore it open and pulled out a drawing of a bedroom. Purple walls, a bunk bed, a bookshelf shaped like a castle. Sadie's eyes lit up. Is that for me? If you'll let me build it, Natalia said. Sadie flung her arms around Natalia's waist without hesitation. Watching them, something in Jonah collapsed. All the doubts, the fears, the voice that kept whispering he wasn't enough at all quieted. That night, as they stood by the porch railing watching the sun dip behind the hills, Jonah turned to her. You're not what I expected. I know, she said. Neither are you. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. She blinked. What is that? I sold my bike. Her brows lifted. The one in the garage you've had since high school? He nodded. Figured it was time to let go of what used to be. She opened the box. Inside was a silver ring engraved with a tiny sunflower. It's not fancy, he said, but it's real. She looked up at him. Are you asking me something? I'm asking if you'll be ours. Me and Sadie. For good. Tears welled instantly. Yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, and she leaned in, kissing him with all the quiet certainty of someone who had finally found what she'd been looking for. Behind them, the wind shifted, sweeping through the fields like a promise. And for the first time, there was nothing left to run from. The first snow fell in late November, blanketing the town in a hush of white. Jonah stood in the middle of what would soon be his auto shop, the floor still concrete dust and scattered tools, the steel framing raw and exposed. His breath clouded in front of him as he turned slowly, taking it all in every square foot of possibility. Natalia stood just inside the doorway, her gloved hands tucked into her coat pockets. It's really happening, he said, voice low. It is, she replied, stepping further inside. He looked over his shoulder at her. You sure you're okay with all this? I didn't build it for me, she said. You're the one who makes things run. He glanced down at the floor, then back at her. I keep thinking I'm gonna mess this up. Then we'll fix it. Together. He crossed the space between them and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. She was warm beneath the layers, and he pressed his cheek to her temple, letting himself believe this wasn't temporary. Outside, Sadie's laughter echoed across the yard as she tossed snow at the golden retriever puppy Natalia had surprised her with the week before. They'd named him Walnut. He was terrible at fetch and too clumsy to be graceful, but Sadie adored him. "You're sure she's not overwhelming you?" Jonah asked, watching the chaos outside through the window. "I think I needed a little chaos," Natalia said, smiling. "She reminds me to stop overthinking everything. She reminds me to check my shoes before I leave the house. I stepped in glitter glue yesterday." Natalia laughed softly. "You never told me you were funny." He kissed the side of her head. "You never ask." That night, while Sadie was at Natalia's officially her new weekend home, Jonah returned to his house to finish packing. The place was nearly empty now. Most of their things had already been moved to the farmhouse, but he hadn't yet let go of the house where Sadie had taken her first steps. Where he'd cried in the kitchen after losing her mother. Where he'd burned pancakes on every birthday morning. He sat on the floor in Sadie's old room, a cardboard box open beside him. Her drawings were still taped to the walls, faded from the sun unicorns, stars, and one lopsided car she'd insisted looked just like Daddy's. He pulled it down carefully and placed it in the box. A knock on the open door made him turn. Natalia stood there, holding 2 mugs of hot cider. "I figured you might need a break." He took one and sat back against the wall. She joined him on the floor. "This place means a lot to you," she said gently. "It's where I became a father. Where I figured out how to keep a baby from crying without losing my mind." She sipped her cider. "Do you feel like you're leaving something behind?" "I think I'm afraid of losing the only thing I ever built right." Natalia set her mug down. "You didn't build this house, Jonah. You built a life in it. And you're not losing that. You're carrying it with you." He turned his head to look at her. "How do you always know what to say?" "I don't," she said. "But I've spent a long time listening to people who only talk. You're the first person I've ever wanted to really hear." He reached over and took her hand. They sat there until the cider cooled and the moon rose over the yard, casting silver light through the bare window frame. 3 weeks later, the garage opened. The ribbon-cutting ceremony wasn't anything fancy because Jonah insisted it shouldn't be. Just a few friends from the town, a couple of neighbors, and a local reporter who wanted to write about the woman who left New York to build engines and grow tomatoes. Natalia rolled her eyes at the headline, but she smiled through it. Jonah stood by the entrance in a clean button-down shirt borrowed from her, actually, and jeans that didn't have holes in them. Sadie wore a tool belt 3 sizes too big and announced loudly to anyone who passed that her dad could fix anything, even a microwave. When the ribbon was cut, Jonah didn't say much. Just nodded, shook a few hands, and then ducked back inside to check the new hydraulic lift. Natalia followed him. "You hate being the center of attention," she said. "I'd rather work," he replied. "You're allowed to celebrate." He turned to her. "You're the one who made this possible." "I gave you a building," she said. "You gave it a heartbeat." He watched her for a moment before tugging her gently by the waist until she stepped into him. "You're not just part of this," he said. "You're part of us." Her breath caught. "I want to be." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "What's this?" she asked, unfolding it. "It's a list," he said, "of everything we'll need for a wedding with hot cocoa, grilled cheese, and a bounce house." She blinked, then laughed, startled. "Are you serious? I want something that feels like us. Not a ballroom. Not a seating chart with 5 forks. Just family, friends, and you in whatever dress makes you smile." She looked up at him. "You want to get married here?" "In the field behind the shop. Under the oak tree." Her voice trembled. "That's perfect." The wedding happened in early spring. Sadie wore a crown of wildflowers and carried the rings in a tiny velvet pouch. Walnut barked halfway through the ceremony and knocked over a chair, but nobody cared. Guests sat on hay bales covered in blankets, sipping cider and eating hand pies from a food truck Natalia had fallen in love with at a fall festival. Jonah waited beneath the tree, fidgeting with his sleeves, until Natalia appeared at the top of the small hill. She walked down barefoot, her hair loose, wearing a dress the color of morning light. She didn't carry a bouquet. She didn't need one. When she reached him, she took his hand without hesitation. The vows were simple, honest. Jonah promised to never stop building a life with her, even when the roof leaked or the engine wouldn't turn over. Natalia promised to never forget where she came from and to always choose love over legacy. They kissed to the sound of applause and Sadie yelling, "EW," before running off to the bounce house. Later, after the sun had dipped low and the fireflies blinked to life in the grass, they danced on the lawn beneath strands of light strung between the trees. Jonah held her close, his hand pressed to the small of her back. "You're not dreaming," she whispered. "Feels like I am." She kissed his jaw. "Then don't wake up." They didn't take a honeymoon. They stayed right there in the farmhouse. The next morning, Jonah made pancakes burnt, as usual, and Natalia insisted they were perfect. Sadie declared it was the best day of her life, even better than when she got to pet a baby goat at the petting zoo. Natalia sat on the porch that evening, legs curled beneath her, watching Jonah and Sadie chase Walnut through the garden. She rested a hand over her stomach and smiled to herself. He didn't know yet. She'd tell him soon. But for now, she just wanted to take in the view the man who never asked for anything, the daughter who gave her more joy than she'd ever known possible, the home built from laughter and second chances. Everything she needed was right here. The woman who once belonged to boardrooms and black cars had found her forever in a mechanic's arms in the quiet strength of someone who never tried to impress her, only ever tried to understand her. And that was more than enough. The snow had melted into the soft promise of spring, and the farmhouse hummed with a rhythm that felt like it had always belonged to them. The days started earlier. Now Jonah was up before the sun with Sadie in the kitchen, packing her lunch and making scrambled eggs that sometimes came out a little too brown, but she ate them anyway without complaint. Natalia would come down barefoot, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and press a kiss to both of their cheeks before pouring herself a cup of tea and sitting at the wide oak table that had taken Jonah 3 weekends to build. This was the life they'd made. Natalia had started writing again. Not code, not proposals, but essays. Quiet, aching meditations about change and love and the strange, beautiful way people rebuild. She didn't tell Jonah at first. It felt too personal, too raw. But one night, he came into the study to bring her a mug of chamomile and saw the screen glowing with words. "You gonna let me read that?" he asked, setting the mug beside her. She turned, surprised. "It's not finished." He leaned over her shoulder. "Doesn't have to be. I want to know the parts of you I haven't met yet." She looked up at him, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't pull back. She opened the document and let him read. When he finished, he didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he pulled up a chair, slid his hand across the table to find hers, and held it. "You write like you're still healing," he said. "I think I am," she whispered. "But I'm not doing it alone anymore." The next week, she submitted her first piece to a small publication that focused on rural life and personal essays. She didn't expect much, maybe a polite rejection. But they loved it, asked for more. And just like that, a part of her that she hadn't even realized had gone quiet came back to life. Jonah never mentioned his surprise. He simply printed out the article when it was published and framed it, hanging it in the garage next to the calendar with Sadie's hand-drawn cars. Late one evening, while Sadie was at a sleepover and Walnut was curled up in front of the fireplace, Natalia sat across from Jonah on the living room rug, her legs tangled with his, a blanket draped around their shoulders. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice hushed, like if she said it too loud, the moment would break apart. He looked up from his sketchpad. "Yeah,
I'm pregnant."
His pencil froze on the page. She held her breath. He didn't move for a long beat, his eyes locked on hers like he needed to be certain he'd heard right. Then, slowly, he set the sketchpad down and crawled across the rug to her, his hands gentle as he cupped her face. Really? She nodded, eyes swimming. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. Are you okay? I'm better than okay, she whispered. I didn't think I could feel this again, he said, resting his forehead against hers. But you and Sadie. And now this. I didn't know I could be this lucky twice. The next few weeks passed in a blur of soft planning and tentative excitement. They waited to tell Sadie until the first ultrasound, until they saw the flicker of life on the screen and heard the heartbeat that made everything real. Sadie sat on the exam room bench, swinging her legs, eyes wide. So, I'm gonna be a big sister? She asked. Natalia reached for her hand. You already are. Sadie blinked, then threw her arms around both of them. I'm gonna teach the baby everything. Even how to do math. And how to paint. And how to tell when daddy's pretending to like broccoli. Jonah grinned. You're gonna be the best big sister in the whole world. That night, they lay in bed, the windows open to the sound of frogs in the pond and crickets in the grass. Natalia rested her head on Jonah's chest, his hand gently stroking her back. I keep thinking about how fast everything happened, she said softly. You regret it? Not a second. He kissed the top of her head. Me neither. They were quiet for a while. Then Natalia whispered, Do you ever think about her? He didn't have to ask who she meant.
Sometimes, he said.
When Sadie smiles a certain way. Or laughs while she's sleeping. But it doesn't hurt like it used to. Not since you. Natalia lifted her head, her eyes searching his. I'll never try to replace her, Jonah. I know that, he said. You didn't replace her. You made room for something new.
They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to.
By early summer, the garden was blooming. Natalia's belly had rounded, and she wore long cotton dresses and wide sun hats that made Jonah stare every time she walked through the yard. Sadie had taken to calling the baby Bean, and insisted on talking to Natalia's stomach like it was already listening. Jonah had started a second lift installation in the garage to keep up with the growing demand. People in town had started calling his place Carrington and Clarke, even though he never officially changed the name. Natalia just laughed and said it sounded like a law firm, but secretly she loved it. One afternoon, as they were setting up for a small barbecue with friends, Natalia paused in the kitchen, pressing a hand to her belly. Jonah noticed immediately. You okay? She looked up, eyes gleaming. I think the baby just kicked. Sadie ran in from the yard. What happened? Natalia took her hand and placed it gently on her bump. They waited. Then thump. Sadie gasped. Beans said hi. That night, after the guests had gone and the fire pit had burned down to glowing embers, Jonah carried a sleeping Sadie inside and tucked her into bed. When he returned to the porch, Natalia was sitting on the swing, arms wrapped around a pillow, her face lit by the soft glow of the string lights overhead. Come here, she said. He sat beside her, and she rested her head on his shoulder. I used to think love had to be earned with perfection, she murmured. With being the smartest, the most successful, the most prepared. He said nothing, just let her speak. But you loved me when I had nothing polished left, when I was messy and uncertain and scared. He brushed a thumb over her cheek. That's the only kind of love that lasts. She tilted her face up to his. Promise me we won't lose this. We won't, he said, because we're not going to be the kind of people who forget how lucky we are. The wind rustled the trees around them, carrying the scent of lavender and smoke. I want to grow old with you, she whispered. In this house. In this life. He pulled her close. That's the plan. Her labor came early one morning in the fall, with the first orange leaves blowing across the porch, and the sky still streaked with stars. Jonah stayed calm, steady. He held her hand through every contraction, whispered to her when the pain crested high, and caught his breath when their son let out his first cry. They named him Leo. He had Natalia's mouth and Jonah's eyes, and a grip like a vice when he wrapped his fingers around Jonah's thumb in the hospital room. Sadie met him that afternoon, holding him like he was made of glass. "I'm gonna protect you forever," she whispered. And no one doubted she would. On Leo's first birthday, they threw a party in the backyard. The garden was full of guests and laughter and homemade lemonade. Sadie painted a giant banner that said, "Happy Birthday, Bean," and Natalia baked a cake shaped like a tractor. Jonah stood with Leo in his arms, watching Natalia laugh with Sadie by the picnic table, and something inside him settled in a way it never had before. This wasn't just happiness. It was peace. The kind that came from knowing you were exactly where you were supposed to be, with exactly the people who made your world whole. Natalia came over, slid her arm around his waist, and leaned into him. "Still feel like you don't have much to offer?" she asked, teasing. He looked down at Leo, then out at the field where Sadie was running barefoot through wild flowers she'd planted herself. "I feel like I have everything." And he did.